I had no reason to go down to the basement that night. The washer in the communal laundry room was broken again, so I had no choice but to use the old machines in the basement. As I descended the creaking stairs, my arms full of clothes, I noticed it, the heavy, industrial metal door at the end of the hallway. It was padlocked, rusted and scratched like something, or someone, had tried to claw their way out. That was the first time I saw it, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. The basement was mostly forgotten by everyone else in the dorm. It smelled damp, and the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead made it feel like the kind of place you wouldn't want to linger. But every time I did laundry, I found myself staring at that door, wondering what could be behind it. I asked around casually, but no one seemed to know much. Probably just storage, one of my roommates said. But if it were just storage, why the heavy-duty padlock? Why the scratches? I couldn't let it go. One night, I stayed up late scrolling through old articles about the dorm. Built in the 1950s, it had once been part of a mental institution. The upper floors were converted into dorm rooms years ago, but the basement, no one talked about it. There was no record of what it had been used for. I told myself I was just curious, but the truth, I needed to know. The closer I got to that door, the weirder things started happening. One night, I heard a faint scraping sound coming from the basement while I was in bed. It was so subtle that at first I thought it was my imagination. But it kept happening, night after night, always around 2 a.m. I started seeing strange things in the laundry room. A single sock that didn't belong to me left on top of the dryer. A puddle of water near the basement stairs that looked darker than water should. Then came the dreams. In them, I was standing in front of the door, but it wasn't locked anymore. It swung open on its own, revealing nothing but darkness. And in that darkness, something moved. Every time I woke up, my chest was tight, my throat dry, and my heart pounding like I'd been running for my life. I had to know. I waited until my roommates were out for the weekend and went to the basement with a crowbar I borrowed from the maintenance closet. My hands trembled as I wedged the bar under the padlock. It took longer than I expected. Every time the crowbar scraped against the metal, the noise echoed through the empty basement and I froze. Certain someone would catch me, but no one came. Finally, with one last shove, the padlock snapped open. The door groaned on its hinges as I pushed it open. The smell hit me first. Thick, metallic, and rotten. I gagged, covering my nose as I stepped inside. The room was pitch black, but I had brought a flashlight. Its beam illuminated the walls. Concrete, stained and covered in deep scratches. On the floor were chains, rusted and bolted into the cement. And then I saw it. A pile of old, yellowed papers, scattered in the corner. Most were illegible, but one caught my eye. A form with the dorm's name at the top and the word patient transfer in bold letters. It was dated 1963. The more I read, the colder I felt. This dorm hadn't just been part of the mental institution. The basement had been used to restrain patients deemed too dangerous for the main facility. Patients who were experimented on. The last paper I picked up was a list of names. Most were crossed out, but the last one wasn't. Next to it was a word that made my blood run cold. Unaccounted. Before I could process what it meant, I heard it scraping. It was coming from the far corner of the room. My flashlight flickered, and in the strobing light, I saw movement. Something hunched and pale, dragging itself toward me. Its arms were unnaturally long, its face obscured by matted hair, but its eyes, they were bright, wide, and filled with something I couldn't describe. I ran. I don't remember how I got out. The next thing I knew, I was back in my dorm room, locking the door and shoving furniture in front of it. My roommates found me the next morning, shaking and refusing to explain. I told myself it wasn't real, that it was my imagination, but the scratches on the basement walls were real. So was the smell. So were the papers. A few weeks later, the dorm was abruptly closed for renovations. They didn't let anyone go back to the basement, but late at night when I passed by the building on my way to class, I can still hear it. the faint sound of scraping coming from deep underground, and I know it's still there, waiting. Imagine waking up in your dorm, the door slightly ajar. You were sure you locked it last night. Now imagine this happening every single day, no matter how careful you are. It was my first semester in college, and I was finally settling into dorm life. My roommate, Alyssa, had dropped out a week before classes started, so I had the room to myself. It wasn't bad, at least I thought so at first. The first time I noticed something strange was after a long day of classes. I returned to my room, dumped my bag on the floor, and collapsed onto my bed. That's when I noticed it. The door. It was unlocked. I was confused. I could have sworn I locked it that morning, but maybe I'd just been careless. After all, I was rushing out to make an 8 a.m. lecture. But it happened again the next day, and the next. Every morning, I'd twist the deadbolt and yank the handle to make sure it was secure. Yet every evening, I'd come back to find the door unlocked. I started obsessing over the lock. Every time I left the room, I double-checked, even triple-checked that it was locked. I tried different combinations, locking it from the inside and leaving through the shared bathroom door, locking it from the outside and pulling the handle hard, but nothing worked. Then I started noticing other things. My desk drawers would be slightly open even though I knew I'd closed them. My water bottle, which I always left on my nightstand, would be on the floor. One night, I woke up to a strange creaking sound. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. My door was ajar. Just a crack. That was when I knew I had to do something. I couldn't go to campus security. What would I even say? That I was too incompetent to lock my own door? They'd laugh me out of the building. Instead, I bought a cheap hidden camera online. It looked like a USB charger, so I plugged it into the outlet near my door and angled it perfectly. For the next 2 nights, I barely slept. I locked my door as usual, set the camera, and waited. On the 3rd morning, I checked the footage, and that's when I saw it. The video showed me leaving the room at 7:15 a.m. A few hours passed with nothing unusual, just the light shifting as the sun moved across the sky. Then, around 1 p.m., the door handle started jiggling. Slowly, almost delicately. The door didn't open, but a moment later, something thin and metallic slipped through the crack. It was a wire hanger. I watched in stunned silence as the hanger maneuvered its way toward the lock. Someone was picking it. Within seconds, the door clicked open. A figure stepped inside. It was a man, late 30s, maybe early 40s. He wasn't a student, that much was clear. He wore a stained hoodie and jeans and carried a small bag. He moved around the room with disturbing familiarity, like he'd done this a dozen times before. He rifled through my desk drawers, picked up my water bottle, and even sat on my bed. My bed. Then, he did something that made my blood run cold. He walked to the closet, opened it, and stepped inside. He didn't come back out. I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. I ran to my closet, adrenaline surging. I didn't stop to think about what I'd do if he was still there. I yanked the door open. It was empty. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stay in that room, not after seeing what I saw. I showed the footage to campus security, and they took it seriously. Thankfully, the maintenance team changed my lock that afternoon. Campus police searched the dorm, but they didn't find anyone. I moved out of the dorm the next day. To this day, I don't know who he was or how he kept getting in, but sometimes, when I'm lying awake at night in my new apartment, I swear I can hear the sound of a door creaking open. And I still wonder, what if he's not done with me yet? Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night, sure that something is wrong but unable to pinpoint what? That's how it started for me. A cold shiver, a prickling on the back of my neck. I was in my dorm room, a cozy little space on the third floor of our old college building. It was past 3 a.m., the kind of hour when the world feels eerily still. I had gone to bed early that night after a long day of classes, locking the door like I always did. I was a little paranoid, sure. My roommate had dropped out 2 weeks into the semester, leaving me alone. But I didn't mind the solitude. Or at least, I didn't until that night. I woke up to a strange sensation, like I was being watched. My heart pounded as I stared into the darkness, trying to adjust my eyes. The faint glow of the streetlights outside barely illuminated the room. At first, I thought it was my imagination. Maybe a nightmare had startled me awake. But then, I saw it. A figure, tall and motionless, stood at the foot of my bed. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, hoping it was a trick of the shadows. It wasn't. There was someone there, watching me. I could just make out the outline of a hooded sweatshirt, the glint of something metallic in their hand. A knife? I froze. My mind raced. The door was locked. I had double-checked it. The windows were shut tight. They didn't even open fully because of the building's old design. How could someone have gotten in? I wanted to scream, but fear had clamped down on my throat like a vice. Instead, I reached for my phone on the nightstand, trying to move as slowly as possible. The figure didn't move. They just stood there, staring. My fingers brushed the edge of my phone, and that's when the figure tilted their head, as if they had just noticed what I was doing. My stomach dropped. "Don't," they said, their voice low and raspy. I froze again, my hand hovering over the phone. "What? What do you want?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. They didn't answer. Instead, they stepped closer. My entire body tensed. Every survival instinct was screaming at me to run, to fight, to do something, but I couldn't move. The intruder stopped inches away from the edge of my bed. I could feel their presence now, heavy and suffocating. They bent down slightly, leaning toward me. I could see their face now. Or rather, the lack of one. They were wearing a mask. A plain, featureless mask. "You should lock your door," they said, their voice eerily calm. I did," I stammered. They chuckled softly, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Not well enough." And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they turned and walked to the door. I watched, frozen in terror, as they unlocked it from the inside. They had been in my room the whole time. The door creaked open, and just before they stepped out, they looked back at me. "Sleep tight," they whispered. The door shut softly behind them. For what felt like an eternity, I didn't move. My heart was racing so fast, I thought it might give out. When I finally gathered the courage to get up, I bolted to the door and locked it again, this time jamming a chair under the handle. The rest of the night, I sat on my bed with my back against the wall, clutching a pair of scissors I'd found in my desk drawer. The next morning, I reported the incident to campus security. They checked the surveillance cameras, but there was nothing. No one entering or leaving the dorm at the time I described. It was as if the intruder had never existed. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind sent me into a panic. I moved out of that dorm by the end of the semester, but even now, I still wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, convinced I'm not alone. And I always double-check my locks. You ever get that feeling in the dead of night, when everything is still, that you're not alone? I wish I had trusted that feeling sooner. Because the night I ignored it was the night everything changed. It started like any other Friday night. My roommate, Rachel, packed her bags and left for the weekend. Her family lived nearby, so it wasn't unusual. Honestly, I was looking forward to the quiet. Finals were coming up and I had a mountain of work to catch up on. By midnight, I was exhausted. I turned off the lamp, crawled into bed, and closed my eyes. But just as I started to drift off, I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound. At first I thought it was nothing, maybe the wind or the old pipes in the walls. But then it came again. A shuffle, followed by a soft, rhythmic tapping. I froze. My heart was racing, but I told myself it was probably just my imagination. Maybe I left a window open? But the thing is, I didn't. I never do. I lay there in the dark, straining to hear. The tapping grew louder, then stopped. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to check. I grabbed my phone, using the flashlight to shine light under Rachel's bed. I didn't want to get up, but my curiosity was driving me crazy. At first I saw nothing. I told myself I was overthinking it, but then the shadow. It wasn't big, but it was there, shifting slightly, moving out of sight every few seconds. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't look away. I told myself to calm down. It could be a trick of the light, something from the hallway, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I kept staring at the shadow, hoping it would stop moving, hoping I was just seeing things. But then it did stop, and that's when I made my second mistake. I whispered, "Rachel? Is that you?" Nothing. No response. Just silence. And then, as if in answer to my question, the shadow moved again. This time it darted toward the edge of the bed. I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, but something in me told me not to. I stayed as still as possible, hoping it would go away. But it didn't. I kept the flashlight trained on the spot where the shadow had moved. I could barely breathe. My heart was pounding in my chest as the light flickered. And then I saw it. Eyes. 2 reflective eyes staring back at me from under the bed. They didn't blink. I froze, not even able to think. I wanted to run, but my body refused to move. The eyes stayed locked on me, unblinking, unfeeling. Then it spoke. "Shh, don't tell." That whisper. It sent a chill through me, freezing me to the spot. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. It was as though the whole room was closing in on me. I don't know how long I sat there, trapped in that moment. All I knew was I needed to get out. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my phone, and bolted for the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock it. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know what was behind me. I ran down the hallway, barefoot and terrified, until I pounded on Sarah's door. She opened, groggy and confused. I barely had the words to explain what had just happened. I told her someone had broken into my room, but when campus security arrived and searched the place, there was nothing. They found no sign of forced entry, no intruder. No one was in the room. It was as if everything had been normal, like I had imagined the whole thing. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I'm not crazy. I don't know who or what that was, but it's still with me and it hasn't left. I hear it sometimes, late at night, when I try to sleep. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.